Clotheshorse is brought to you with support from the following sustainable brands. Selena Sanders, a social impact brand that specializes in upcycled clothing using only reclaimed, vintage, or thrifted materials from tea towels, linens, blankets, and quilts. Sustainably crafted in Los Angeles, each piece is designed to last in one's closet for generations to come. Maximum style, minimal carbon footprint. Picnic Wear, a slow fashion brand made by hand in New York City from vintage and deadstock textiles. Picnic Wear strives for minimal waste but maximum authenticity. Future vintage over future garbage. Find Picnic Wear on Instagram at Picnic Wear, and that's Wear, W-E-A-R, and at www.picnicwear.com. No Flight Back Vintage, bringing fun new life to old things. Always using recycled and secondhand materials to make dope-ass shit for dope-ass people. See more on Instagram at No Flight Back Vintage. Shift Clothing out of beautiful Astoria, Oregon, with a focus on natural fibers, simple hardworking designs, and putting fat people first. Discover more at shiftwheeler.com. Late to the Party, creating one-of-a-kind statement clothing from vintage, salvaged, and thrifted textiles. They hope to tap into the dreamy memories we all hold. Floral curtains, a childhood dress, the wallpaper in your best friend's rec room, all while creating modern, sustainable garments that you'll love wearing and have for years to come. Late to the Party is passionate about celebrating and preserving textiles, the memories they hold, and the stories they have yet to tell. Check them out on Instagram at Late to the Party People. Vino Vintage, based just outside of LA. We love the hunt of shopping secondhand because you never know what you might find. Catch us at flea markets around Southern California by following us on Instagram at vino.vintage so you don't miss our next event. Gabriella Antonis is a visual artist and an ethical trade fashion designer. But Gabriella is also a radical feminist micro-business. She's the one-woman band trying to help you understand why slow fashion is what the earth needs. The one-woman band to help you build your own brand. She can take your fashion line from just a concept and do your sketches, pattern making, grading, sourcing, cutting, and sewing. The second option is for those who aren't trying to start a business and who just want ethical garments. Gabriella Antonis will create custom made-to-measure garments just for you. Her goal is to help one person of any size at a time, including beyond size 40. To inquire about this serendipitous intersectional offering of either concept, DM her on Instagram to book a consultation. Please follow her on Instagram and Twitter at Gabriella Antonis. And that's Gabriella with one L. Gotta get that spelling right. Dylan Page is an online clothing and lifestyle brand based out of St. Louis, Missouri. Our products are chosen with intention for the conscious community. Everything we carry is animal-friendly, ethically made, sustainably sourced, and cruelty-free. Dylan Page is for those who never stop questioning where something comes from. We know that personal experience dictates what's sustainable for you, and we are here to help guide and support you to make choices that fit your needs. Check us out at dylanpage.com and find us on Instagram at dylanpagelifeandstyle. Salt Hats, purveyors of truly sustainable hats, hand-blocked, sewn, and embellished in Detroit, Michigan. Find us on Instagram at Salt Hats. Karen Kinney Studio. Located in Western Massachusetts, Karen specializes in handcrafted earrings from found, upcycled, and repurposed fabrics, as well as other eco-friendly curios, all with a hint of nostalgia, a dollop of whimsy, a dash of color, and 100% fun. Karen is an artist/designer who believes the materials we use matter. See more on Instagram at Karen Kinney Studio or online at www.ckinney.com. Gentle Vibes Vintage. We are purveyors of polyester and psychedelic relics. We encourage experimentation and play not only in your wardrobe, but in your home too. We have thousands of killer vintage pieces ready for their next adventure. See them all on Instagram at Gentle Vibes Vintage. Thumbprint is Detroit's only fair trade marketplace, located in the historic Eastern Market. Our small business specializes in products handmade by empowered women in South Africa, making a living wage, creating things they love like hand-painted candles and ceramics. We also carry a curated assortment of sustainable and natural locally made goods. Thumbprint is a great gift destination for both the special people in your life and for yourself. Browse our online store at thumbprintdetroit.com and find us on Instagram at thumbprintdetroit. Blank Cass, or Blanket Coats by Cass, is focused on restoring, renewing, and reviving the history held within vintage and heirloom textiles. By embodying the love, craft, and energy that is original to each vintage textile as I transfer it into a new garment, I hope we can reteach ourselves to care for and mend what we have and make it last. Blank Cass lives on Instagram at _Cass, and a website will be launched soon at blankcass.com. Located in Whistler, Canada, Velvet Underground is a velvet jungle full of vintage and secondhand clothing, plants, a vegan cafe, and lots of rad products from other small sustainable businesses. Our mission is to create a brand and community dedicated to promoting self-expression, as well as educating and inspiring a more sustainable and conscious lifestyle, both for the people and the planet. Find us on Instagram at shop_velvetunderground or online at www.shopvelvetunderground.com. St. Evens is a New York City-based vintage shop that is dedicated to bringing you those special pieces you'll reach for again and again. More than just a store, St. Evens is dedicated to sharing the stories and history behind the garments. 10% of all sales are donated to a different charitable organization each month. For the month of August, St. Evens is supporting the Women's Prison Association, empowering women to redefine their lives in the face of injustice and incarceration. New vintage is released every Thursday at wearstevens.com with previews of new pieces and more, brought to you on Instagram at wear_st.evens. That's Wear St. Evens. Country Feedback is a mom and pop record shop in Tarboro, North Carolina. They specialize in used rock, country, and soul and offer affordable vintage clothing and housewares. Do you have used records you want to sell? Country Feedback wants to buy them. Find us on Instagram at Country Feedback Vintage and Vinyl, or head down east and visit our brick and mortar. All are welcome at this inclusive and family-friendly record shop in the country. Republica Unicornia Yarns, handmade yarn and notions for the color obsessed, made with love and some swearing in fabulous Atlanta, Georgia by head yarn wench Kathleen. Get ready for rainbows with a side of giving a damn. Republica Unicornia is all about making your own magic using small batch, responsibly sourced, hand-dyed yarns and thoughtfully made notions. Slow fashion all the way down and discover the joy of creating your very own beautiful hand-knit, crocheted, or woven pieces. Find us on Instagram at Republica_Unicornia_yarns and at www.republicaunicornia.com. Welcome to Clotheshorse, the podcast that never thought I would talk about H&M as much as I do now. Seriously, I hadn't thought about H&M for so long, and now I talk about H&M like every other day. What the heck? I'm your host, Amanda, and this is episode 95. Wow. Today's guest is Garik, the founder of Eco-Stylist. He'll be explaining to you in a lot more detail about what Eco-Stylist does. But if I were going to give you the 10 cents version of it, okay, maybe 25 cents version of it, I guess I would say that Eco-Stylist makes it easier to shop for sustainable and ethical brands and know that you're truly shopping sustainable and ethical brands because Eco-Stylist does all of the background checking for you. which means, of course, that Garik and his team, with the help of Remake, have to decipher and filter out a ton of greenwashing. So Garik is an expert on greenwashing. And when he reached out to me and said, it would be fun to talk about greenwashing together, I was very excited because there are so many ways in which brands confuse us into giving them our money by offering us this illusion, maybe even a delusion, that they are doing something great for the planet and its people. So I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. As an aspiring greenwashing detective. I don't know. Maybe I'm already there. Maybe I'm officially a greenwashing detective. This is a longish episode. I thought about cutting it in half and I was like, why? Just give it all at once. And then you know what? If you want to take a break halfway through, that's what you should do. There is a podcast that I listen to. It's called Mother May I Sleep With Podcast. It's about Lifetime movies. I love it. I have seen almost none of the movies they talk about. Doesn't matter. Those episodes are 2, 3, 4 hours long. And what I do is I stretch them over a couple days and it's really enjoyable. So this episode's going to be a little bit more than 2 hours. Maybe you want to do that. All right. Well, there's a lot to talk about, obviously. So let's just jump right in. Garik, why don't you introduce yourself to everyone?
Yeah, hi, I'm Garik Heimbaugh. I'm the founder of Eco-Stylist, which is the go-to resource for stylish and ethical clothing. And I'm really happy to be here on your podcast.
I'm happy to have you here. We're going to talk about one of my favorite things to get riled up about, which is greenwashing. But first I thought, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Because I know, because I've already heard the story, but nobody listening has. How did you end up starting Eco-Stylist?
Yeah, been an interesting journey. Definitely not one that's like linear or predictable really in any way. Like it's not
Totally.
Like, oh, when I was 5, I knew I was going to start a sustainable fashion business.
You didn't? What?
No. No, it's so for me, I actually had no idea I was going to be doing this. I guess I would say that it started with my quarter life crisis. Honestly, when I was 25, I hit like what was a personal rock bottom for me, where I was just, I had gone to college for peace studies essentially, and we had studied abroad in Liberia, and so I was pretty passionate about wanting a job that had an impact, a positive impact in the world. And reality didn't align with that when I got out there. And it's not that obviously that, there's jobs where you can have an impact and everything, but I wasn't able to find one off the bat. Had a lot of trouble in the DC job market where everybody has a master's degree and I wasn't ready to go to grad school. So I ended up in finance, and it wasn't for me. It just wasn't for me. I wasn't passionate about it. But I kind of used hobbies and things for me as like an escape. So I was always learning outside of work, and I ran like a productivity blog and worked on cars, and I did try like all these side businesses. I was doing all these things to keep myself occupied, and then I just hit rock bottom, and where I was like, wow, I don't like anything about my life. And so I so I literally I moved, quit my job, and changed my phone number in the same 1 month period. Yeah, and I did a total reset, and I know that sounds really drastic, but that's actually what I did. And then I just felt like I needed a change, a big one. And that kind of started me on the journey of changes. And then I started making changes faster after that, because I was like, this next job in Pittsburgh wasn't really for me either. It was cool, but so from there I ended up in grad school for business. I figured at that point I was interested in social entrepreneurship, and I figured, business and peace studies, kind of a good combination. So I had some idea, but I still thought I was going to go work for a company for a few years. And I started a fashion startup on the side while I was in grad school, and it wasn't actually ethical or sustainable in the beginning. And then I met the founder of an ethical brand, which led me down a rabbit hole of research. This was 4 or 5 years ago. And that was the impetus for me to be you know what, if I'm going to start a fashion startup, I don't want to support, Amazon and ASOS. I want to help people discover really cool brands like this that are doing, really good things for people on the planet. So, and make it easy to find things from those brands that are stylish, right? Because I think the problem for me when I got into sustainable fashion is, I was like, it just took so much time to find the brands. And I felt like people who don't love style or shopping like I do aren't going to like spend, hundreds of hours, so I was like, can I make this easier for other people? And so 3 years ago was the official start of Eco-Stylist. There was obviously there was pre-work before that, but Eco-Stylist started 3 years ago. We started with just focusing on men because we wanted to help. We saw that as an unfilled niche in the sustainable fashion space, but we since brought in to be a resource for everyone.
That's amazing. So why don't you explain a little bit more about what Eco-Stylist does? Because I feel like you are offering a very unique service out there, and that you are taking the vetting that we can get from places like Remake or Good On You, but you're also connecting with brands. And I think I love that because a lot of people reach out to me all the time and they're like, where should I shop? What should I do? And I'm like, well, that's not really my wheelhouse, but here are all the people who've done all this work already. But I think people get discouraged because they're like, okay, so you're telling me I have to go to one website to look for this, to get a list of where I should shop. Then I have to go to each of those brands' websites to look for things. And it's a lot of work, right? Comparatively, it would be way more work if you had to get in your car and drive to all of these places. But I think people get discouraged by that. So how do you screen brands for this?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great point, Amanda, because it can be a lot of work, not just on the research side, like you said. So what Eco-Stylist really is a resource for stylish and ethical fashion. We've tried to we've built a variety of tools to help make that process easier for people. So at the core is which I'll get to our brand ratings. But that's at the core we have vetted brands that where it's just a list of good brands. So it's like if you want to find brands that are stylish and sustainable that are great, here's a list of them that have all been vetted. And so we have that. That's kind of our core resource. We also have a blog, very active blog. So tons of content there, which can help, if you're looking for, ethical underwear brands or, ethical streetwear brands or whatever it is, we can address different topics in our blog. And then we've kind of really as a true startup, we've pivoted a lot in our journey. So we've experimented too with services. So in order to kind of, like you're saying, make it easier for people, we have a marketplace as well on the site where we curate items for folks. We also do personal styling. We have personal stylists on our team who you can book a virtual call with them and they'll do the shopping for you. So you don't even have to know the brands in that case,
Wow.
They're
That's
your
awesome.
ethical personal shopper. Yeah. So we test. So essentially we're kind of constantly testing things to see how we can make that journey easier for people, and working on what the best way to do that is, and while also obviously being sustainable. We weren't super keen, right away to jump into services like say a box service or something, because we were like, well, if we're going to do that, we want to do it in a way that's sustainable. So we've just really put a lot of thought behind kind of trying to find that intersection of how do we help people, but in a way that's that's aligned with our values. But so to the brand ratings, so we partner with Remake actually, and so our brand research is all powered by Remake, and it was just the right move. We believe their criteria is the best out there. We used to have our own criteria in the beginning for determining if brands are ethical and sustainable, and then I met the founder of Remake at a conference, and she had a vision that we could do more together if we collaborate, and and honestly, and their criteria was just better. It was better developed than ours was, and it just made a lot of sense. I was like, what, I believe in their criteria. I think this is the definition of sustainable that I want to put forward, right? Because that's, if you talk about what makes a brand sustainable, you have to define that. And I like their definition, which is, very much is, 50-50 in people and the environment. And I wanted to help promote that and put that forward. So so all our research is powered by their criteria. And, it's really thorough, and brands have to earn every point they get. And it's, that's kind of how we do the research.
That's great. That's great. So to be clear, just for people who are listening, like you are not a store. You don't own this inventory. Basically, you're connecting people in a much easier, streamlined interface with brands that are sustainable and ethical. So you're not like you're not a store. I guess I'm just, because that can be confusing for some people. It was really obvious to me looking at your site, but I also work in that industry. So I knew that you weren't like a boutique that was stocking all this stuff and shipping it off to people.
Exactly. Yeah, no, we're a resource, and that gives us, like I said, a lot of flexibility to figure out the best ways we can serve our users and help them find stylish and sustainable clothes. Because we're not limited. It's not just like sell, or we don't have inventory. It's just finding the right tools using technology. And so, so we have 57 brand partners at the moment.
Wow.
But that's going to be close to 100 by the end of the year. We have a bunch of brands that will be launching here soon.
That's amazing. I think this is great because right now, for many people, it seems so challenging to make sustainable and ethical decisions because, as we're going to talk about in this episode, the greenwashing is so confusing. It's really hard, unless you've made this your life's work or can make it your life's work, to figure out where to shop, right? It's just like so hard. I'm sure you encounter all kinds of greenwashing all the time. So we're going to break that down. We're going to give you the signs of greenwashing. Sign number 1 is using words that aren't actually measurable. And I wanted to ask you, Garik, what is your favorite word that has been destroyed by greenwashing?
There's so many.
So many. I know.
So many of these words.
I know. They're so terrible. Like green. I mean, that one I still see. I feel like green was like one of the early greenwashing terms. Like just put green on it and people will think it is. And you're like, this is a bottle of Clorox, But green is one that I still see out there all the time. Like you can't measure the greenness of a product unless we're really talking about the color green, which in that case, sure. So green is a classic example of a greenwashing term.
Yes, yeah, green. Some other favorites of mine would be conscious. Thinking of a certain brand's conscious collection. Sustainably is one that's like where brands will say, especially like brands like Zara and H&M will do this, where they'll make these claims that something is like, quote, like more sustainably made, and they don't elaborate on that at all.
I know, and then you're like, okay, cool, sold. I think it's unfortunate, like the word sustainable, sustainably, all of all of the words related to that have been just destroyed. Like they have no meaning anymore because they're being tossed around kind of willy-nilly. They're such a buzzword. I mean, sustainability is like what I see constantly, like in every industry publication of like, sustainability is the hot new trend. And I'm like, no, let's not make, I mean, I want it to be a trend and that people care more, but let's not make it a fashion trend, because then it loses all meaning. And believe it or not, sustainably isn't something that you can actually measure, which means it's not a provable claim. And I was telling Garik as we were preparing for this episode about this really depressing article that I'd read last week that's from about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, and talked about how basically when it comes to research into sustainability, as in actual like scientific research and innovations into the impact of the fashion industry or any other industry on this planet, and ways in which it could be better, research into innovations to make these industries actually more sustainable. Well, no one wants to fund that because it's not a very glamorous story. And so a majority of the sustainability research being done right now in this world, specifically when we talk about fashion, is being funded by places like H&M and other big industry players. So they're kind of paying for the type of research that they would like to see that will basically create marketing talking points. I mean, I know that sounds like so tinfoil hat conspiracy theory, But unfortunately, that's the reality, because unless governments start dumping money into this kind of research, scientists who care about this stuff are at the mercy of these brands. That's the only that's where the money's coming from right now. So it's really great because it creates metrics that these brands can use to promote their products, to make them seem sustainable. And you sent me an article. Wait, let me open it up here with the title, 60% of sustainability claims made by fashion giants are greenwashing, which is really, really depressing and true. I mean, actually, I don't know about you, but I thought the number would be a lot higher than 60%.
Yeah, I think that definitely speaks to the broadness of brands in which they looked at, because like some of the brands in that study it was like 80% of their claims. You know,
H&M was 96%.
Yikes!
I know, 96% of the claims that they made were greenwashing. ASOS and Marks and Spencer came in at 89%. And in just general, that like fast fashion bucket of retailers came in around 88%. So really, really high. Basically, it's like you can't believe much that you're reading or hearing.
Yeah, and I just want to jump into, you're absolutely right about the research. It's because most of it is funded by brands who are partaking in fast fashion, and unsustainable practices, which is obviously a conflict of interest. And governments around the world have shown very little interest in this, right? Like the U.S. government, even in California, right, we're struggling to pass a bill that will, ensure a fair wage for workers. Not saying that won't happen. I'm just saying but it's requiring work, and so it's like, yeah, and governments aren't really, and even in places like, like the UK, where you maybe think sustainable fashion has made a little more progress in the public mind. They have trouble getting legislation passed. So yeah, the governments aren't there, and I think in academia, I think it's new. Like I actually have had quite a few people in academia and like professors reach out to me, over the last 3 years. But I get the sense that all of them are in relatively new positions in terms of like where they're teaching sustainable fashion, right? Like that's new to have sustainable fashion in an academic setting. And so like, I think the good news there is research will be coming, I'm sure, having academics, but like the whole idea of academics being in that discipline and that focus I think is very new.
Yeah. And I think a lot of retailers are realizing that this is the hot trend, right? That they need to start speaking to it. And so recently I've seen a lot of jobs popping up on LinkedIn that are like sustainability managers for a lot of big fast fashion retailers. And the job descriptions are always really interesting because, for one, the retailers don't really know what they're doing. And two, I hope that they understand realistically that they cannot undo everything they've done so far and rebrand as sustainable and change all their practices. Like it would mean totally dismantling their entire companies. And so instead, a lot of these job descriptions are really focused on like making the campus more sustainable, like getting people to use less paper and switching light bulbs and charitable giving. And it's just, I see how it's a smokescreen. I look at some of the companies who, everybody's got their sustainability, corporate responsibility pages going these days. And some of them are filled with really elaborate claims and videos and imagery that are no doubt mostly greenwashing. And others are just so like silly. Like we hand out reusable bags and we use LED lighting in our warehouse. And you're like, this, I guess it's a baby step, but like at the level this company is, it should be so much more, right?
No, 100%. I think some of the most infuriating examples of that, which are, I think this is like a step beyond greenwashing, but this would be like Dow Chemical and Shell Oil, putting out paid ads as well as putting out on their social media these like quizzes where it's like, learn how to reduce your personal environmental impact.
I know.
And it's like, I'm sorry, but are you like kidding me? Like how like to have how could they possibly put the onus like on us as individuals when those companies have massive environmental footprints?
The audacity of it, really.
Exactly.
It's ridiculous. But it is. I think I'm glad to see that more and more people are seeing through that. I see a lot of social media content around that, like why are the oil companies telling us it's on us to change this? But at the same time, I think we're not seeing, like, the general public doesn't see the fashion industry in the same way, and they should, because even these brands with their so-called conscious collections are really putting the psychological responsibility of sustainability on their customers. Because if they were saying, we're going to own up to this, we're going to change our ways, well, their entire collection, everything they sold would be conscious. They would stop selling so much stuff and pay their workers and all of these other things. But they're not doing that. It's a complete lack of sincerity and authenticity, really. And so some of these other words that they love to throw out there are eco-friendly. Another thing, I mean, what does that even mean, right? Natural is another favorite, because isn't everything really in one way or another kind of natural? It's all organic matter somehow. Recyclable or recycled is also just, I mean, we've done previous episodes about how unfortunately we've all been wishfully recycling for a really long time. But I don't care if the garment I'm wearing was somehow made of a recycled material, because if it's not going to be recyclable after I'm done with it, which it probably isn't. And another one that you and I, which we can talk about more later, is I don't know if this is a little bit greenwashing. This is a lot ethical washing, which is made in the USA. Maybe one of the most egregious ones, actually. Because it implies this idea that if it's made in the United States, it's better for the people and the planet. And that is, in most cases, just not true.
Yes. Yeah, no, those are all great. A couple that I would add would be that I've seen a lot of greenwashing around would be, so sustainable fabrics would be one, honestly, where it really matters what is being used, right? Because a brand like, and the thing is, I think what we're really getting at here is like a lot of basically there's just tons of greenwashing because the industry and the terms aren't regulated, and so so sustainable fabrics, that was a huge one. Like brands like H&M will say more than we're going to have like 100% of our collection be like more quote unquote like more sustainable fabrics by X year. And the thing is, like, the problem is how do they define that? And where it gets problematic is they define that as like what they're talking about. The vast majority of their collection they're talking about there is they're talking about converting to BCI cotton, right? Better Cotton Initiative, which is a step in the right direction. But it's just interesting because like that would rank less good than obviously like organic cotton or regenerative cotton, or I don't know, a variety of other. So it's like it's not like the best. It's like a step in the right direction, but it's not like the best step. And there's and they're just kind of using that. But it gets worse though, because they're also, when they say more sustainably made fabrics, sometimes they're even talking about like polyester, for example, because they've used data from like the Higg index that suggests that polyester has like a better I forget what it ranks better than, but the problem with that is it's a snippet of data, right? Obviously, virgin polyester is terrible; it derives from oil, and the thing is, I believe if I remember this correctly, the problem with that data point is that it doesn't take into account the full life cycle of the fabric, right? Like it's only a snippet of the fabric's lifespan, right? And you're talking about a fabric that's not biodegradable, that's derived from oil, that sheds microplastics. So and then you have H&M like considering that to be like a more sustainable option. So that's one. I think radical transparency. Not to hit on that particular brand, but I think that term,
we will be.
That term has been ruined because obviously when we talk about when you and I talk about transparency, we're talking about we're really talking about brands being more like a lot more transparent about where their factories are, how like what the wages are those factories pay, who the workers are. Some brands even let you meet the people in in their factories, and essentially when Everlane started this radical transparency slogan, right, what they were actually talking about in the beginning was their price transparency, which is kind of a slap in the face when you talk about the ethical side of transparency, because price transparency has nothing to do with the people who made our clothes, right? That has all to do with us. It's a selfish thing. Like we want to know, and don't get me wrong, like sure that's nice, but like we want to know the inputs and how much it costed them to make the shirt, so we know that we're getting a fair deal. But that's all selfish. Like that's all about us. It has nothing to do with the person who made it, and whether or not they're getting a fair wage. And then they kind of added like where their factories are with like very little extra information, to that. So like, and so like, I don't know, like if I use radical in front of the word transparency, like I said, I would think of brands like Known Supply that let you like meet the people who made your clothes, and include like, the name of the person on the inside of the tag, like that, or like Adelante Shoe Company is a brand we love where, where the makers like sign the shoes and you can meet all of their makers as well in their impact reports and such. So like I would think of like those brands when I think of like radical. I wouldn't think of Everlane.
No, I think that's interesting. So definitely people would hear radical transparency coming from Everlane and believe that Everlane truly was being radically transparent about everything. But you're right. It was about price. I think that greenwashing is successful because it kind of exploits our innate selfishness. So for Everlane, not only does it give us this false belief that they're doing everything the right way, and so we can rest assured. It also makes us feel like we're getting a good deal, right? Which people love. We all love getting a good deal. But more importantly, all of this greenwashing, it exploits our desire to have less of an impact on the planet, to do better without having to change any of our habits, which is kind of, it's a little selfish, right? We're used to being able to buy a new outfit for every wedding, every date, just cycle through clothing like nonstop. And H&M recognizes that. For example, we're going to talk about other brands too, but H&M is a big one that knows that we want to continue buying new clothes every time we're having a bad day or we're going out or having a picnic or all the other dumb reasons we buy new clothes when we don't need them. So it's H&M is saying, like, we get that. Here's a way to keep doing that, which benefits our company by keeping us in business, that also allows you to feel better psychologically about what you're doing. And I think that's a hard reconciliation for a lot of people. Like a few weeks ago, a study came out, basically said, rental not as great for the planet as we thought, which as a person who's worked in that industry, I will 100% say clothing rental is not as good for the planet as people might hope. And I saw a lot of comments on posts about that. People were like losing their minds, being very, very defensive, very angry. And I think it was because no one wanted to hear that this thing that was allowing them to continue to have new clothes all the time and feel better about it was actually not that great. And that maybe the core of the problem is our constant need for new clothing.
Yes. No, that's a really great point you brought up. And I think I wanted to hit something else you brought up that I think was like really on point, and I think we really struggle with this in sustainable fashion, is like when you brought up price and how we have like an emotional attachment to that. I think I want to talk about something there because I think it's really, really important. And I don't think a lot of people maybe realize this, but our relationship to and feelings about price are not really our own, right? Like they are, that is decades of marketing brainwashing from a variety of brands. Not even just fast fashion was a part of that for sure. Fast fashion taught us that clothes should be disposable and cheap, right? Neither of which is true. But they taught us that over years. But it's not just them. Like we've been brainwashed into thinking that like things should be affordable, and we value that almost like it's a personal value to us, because it's been decades of it from brands like Walmart, and even brands like Target in their latest advertisement, their what is their slogan? It's like okay, it's slipping my mind right now, but it's something like live your life, and living a great life shouldn't cost you more, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Yeah, and it's honest. I'm sorry, but it's bullshit. Like, and there's things I like about Target, like in terms of like they're attempting to partner with like having more fair trade products in their store, and they're trying to work with some sustainable brands and stuff. So they're doing some positive things, but that's just BS from right. Like that is they're entrenching this idea in our hearts and minds, and then because then when you and I and everybody try to have conversations about hey, maybe clothes actually should cost more, because in order for them to be made right, and in order for the person who made them to be paid fairly, you get a lot of resistance because people have been taught that is not the case. And so you are like fighting a war essentially against everyone who believes that that's not the case. And so it's just really hard to then be like pause. let's take a moment here and ask, like, how much should our clothes really cost? How often should we really buy them? Yeah, because it just brings up like a strong emotional reaction, as I'm sure you've noticed when you talk about price.
Yeah, I mean, and I think price is something I cannot talk about enough, because back when I recorded the very first episode of Clotheshorse and was doing research, I was shocked to discover, I mean, I had intrinsically guessed this because I had seen how pricing had changed even during my career, but clothing is cheaper now than it was in the 90s. And that's nothing else is. You know what I mean? Like nothing else is. And even like my husband and I like to sometimes watch 80s episodes of The Price is Right. It's like our comfort zone. And every once in a while there'll be clothes on The Price is Right. It always is like these Hager trousers, which are on The Price is Right, I want to say $42 in 1983. I Googled those exact pants because the great thing about this company is they're making the same clothes, and they are now $39.99. Meanwhile, a car in that era was like $8,000. And I don't even know how much a car is now because I've never had a brand new one, but I would guess it's around $30,000, $20,000, regardless, a massive increase in price that makes sense because, you know, cost of living has shifted. Why are those Hagar pants cheaper? You know?
Yeah.
So I think, I mean, we have so much unpacking as a society to do around our feelings around the price of clothing, because we also think we need a lot more clothes than we need, you know? And I think the fear becomes, well, if t-shirts were twice as expensive, then I could only have half as many t-shirts. But it's like, take a step back. I bet you have tons of t-shirts that you don't wear very often. You know, or like the behavior of buying new underwear rather than doing your laundry. Everybody's known someone like that. That's crazy. I don't like that, you know?
Yeah.
I just think we have a lot of unpacking to do there. And, you know, Target, I'm glad you brought up Target. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts here because I have so many complicated feelings about Target. Independent of its branding or the aesthetic it's selling. It's like on one hand, Target is offering more and more zero waste product. You know, they are offering more product from Black-owned businesses. They, you know, even their advertising gives you a warm and fuzzy feeling because it'll be like same-sex couples and then a kid in a wheelchair getting dressed up for Halloween. And you're like, oh my God, this is the world I want to live in, right? But then you go in there and the entry rack is a whole mountain of $5 t-shirts that are supposedly sustainable. And that's just impossible, right? Which we're gonna get to why that's not sustainable further in our conversation. But to be clear, you can't make a sustainable t-shirt for $5.
Just to be clear, we haven't written an article about Target, so it's or anything. So it's not like a brand we've dug into extensively. But I can say that this hits on my general feeling about big brands, which is where I struggle. Is that like I'm always happy to see like genuine initiatives are great, right? And I think, like I said, Target like have some genuine initiatives that I'm aware of. But the problem that I always have personally, just personally with big brands, is like it's always really hard to tell what's genuine, because when they have some genuine initiatives, right? But it's a small percentage of what they do total. Then you do have to wonder, like, okay, do they actually care about this? Do they mean it, or are they just doing like what I call the bare minimum, right? There's this bare minimum amount of good where like if you do a few things but you keep like 95% of your business unsustainable, you know, people will feel better about your brand. And honestly, a lot of times that's why the brands are doing it, unfortunately, in the first place. And that's where my red flag was up, because I'm like, if I feel like they're not really in it and they're just trying to make me feel good about them, they're basically doing the bare minimum, right? Then I don't want to support that brand, because that's like, okay, cool, you have some fair trade products in your store, but like, you know, you're just doing that like as much as you think you need to, so that I'll still buy from you, you know. And I think that's kind of the feeling I've gotten from a lot of big brands when they roll out sustainability initiatives, and it's really unfortunate. And that's why I kind of tend to just not support big brands, even when they do have good initiatives of a small size, because it just, I have to wonder what they're really trying to get at there.
Another thing that you brought up when we were talking, which I haven't mentioned to the listeners before, I think it's really important to talk about, is paying for keywords.
Mm.
And basically, jump in if I'm doing a bad job, because you actually have an e-commerce background in a different way than I do. So keywords are basically like search terms that companies bid on and pay for that push them up higher in the search results. When you search, like, say, eco-friendly or sustainable or recycled on Google. Did I do a good job of describing that? Would you add on to that?
Yes, essentially, yeah. So I guess the one thing we should make clear is that, like, when you pay for keywords, you that is only for showing up in ad positions. But obviously with Google, the ads, the ads don't, people probably recognize the ads, but they don't look that different. They look like search results. They just have a little ad thing next to them.
It's confusing.
It's confusing, exactly. And essentially, but yes, basically, Everlane, for example, could pay for the term ethical fashion, and show up like first on the first page of Google on the top as an ad because they paid for that spot. The second part of that, though, which is also can be done unethically, is SEO, right? Which is search engine optimization, which that's the work you do to get to the top of Google without paying, right? So, without paying for that spot. If you're the first result on Google, that's not an ad. That's SEO that got you there. And the thing is, that's not like, that game is actually being played with money too, because the thing there is like, it's like, so say for like ethical fashion, right? If you show up as like if you show up as like the first brand when people search for ethical clothing, right? The thing is like that it may be a good result, right? I don't even know what the first result is for that, but the thing is, what can happen as well, though, is that you could have paid for a lot of features in like, USA Today and big media sources. And so like it makes you be viewed as a reputable result for that term and for that space. And so you're put there, in the algorithm, when in reality, there may be little to no evidence supporting that you're actually an ethical brand.
Man, let me tell you, SEO is like, if you are good at SEO, you are going to be getting paid so much money. It's like such a luxury item to maximize SEO in the world of e-commerce. And please be aware that anything you search, it's not as unbiased as you might think it could be. I don't want to say Google's betraying you, but Google makes a lot of money off of both selling these search terms and, just bombarding us with ads, right? When you and I were talking before, you talked about Everlane, for example, bidding on ethical fashion, right? I would say that putting that stake in the ground and spending that money is making a very public declaration that you are ethical fashion.
Yes. Yeah, no, exactly.
But it's a gray area, right?
Yeah. Well, no, but you're right, though. It's actually, when you realize that's what they're doing, because the thing is, I think that they probably weren't counting on people realizing that's what they were doing. But the thing is, you're right, because that's actually pretty black and white to say that is a way of claiming. Like, that is a way of claiming, like, I'm ethical fashion. And the reason that's problematic is because when people have, obviously there's been, Everlane has been called out in the press a lot, so I can't even really put a timeline on which one this was. But at one of the points in which they were called out for not being so ethical, like their founder's response was that we don't claim to be an ethical brand, and it was like, huh, really? Like, because like if you don't claim to be an ethical brand, you wouldn't like do all of that. You wouldn't like pay for those keywords, and you wouldn't pay for those positions, because in their case, it's definitely that other piece is definitely true, right? Where people often wonder, like, how did Everlane end up in everybody's ethos as like top 10 sustainable brand, right? Because honestly, when you like, they were like, we wrote an article where we ran Everlane through remakes criteria. This was 3 years ago. We wrote an article. We ran them through the criteria. They failed. And at that point, that was surprising news to a lot of folks. And so like that article was really popular. It was on the first page of Google, organically, because people were reading it. And the thing is, like, people were surprised. Some people were even angry to read our article, because it was all like, it was in so many people's heads that like, this is a sustainable, ethical brand. And people were like, well, why did I think this? Why did I think this? And honestly, myself included, like before we researched them and everything, I actually had, considered them a sustainable brand in the past. And what I realized after looking into this is it's because they position themselves that way. Like they they pay for these spots in like in USA Today, for example, where it's like top 10 sustainable brands, and then USA Today charges 25 to 3,500 per slot to those brands, and they pay it. And then but when folks see it, they're like, oh, top 10 sustainable brands, not realizing that like those brands just paid for those spots. So I think the key takeaway here isn't like, obviously Google's not the enemy. Like Google's a great resource. I think everybody uses it, but the point is like it's not. It shouldn't be like your number one or like your most trusted resource for sustainable fashion, right? Like that's why it's important to have other resources, like Eco-Stylist, like Remake, et cetera, that you trust, because that can be a much better starting point than Google, because when you're using Google, you do need to sift through that noise and be like, if one of those top 10 results you got are, if it is like USA Today or like Men's Journal or like, I don't know, all these publications that just like, just let people pay for those spots, then it's not going to give you a good result. And it wasn't researched in terms of like their definition of ethical and sustainable is essentially meaningless.
Oh, yeah, totally. And I was telling you about how, for example, when I was trying to vet all of these different forms of faux leather, like Piñatex, which is made of parts of pineapple, and there's an apple leather and cactus leather, all of these things, I would Google them because I had a feeling, just based on my experience with faux leathers and my knowledge of how they are made and how they get that leather-like quality, that based on my experience, there was no way that anything being made out of pineapple leaves or whatever, or cacti, would have that leather-like quality without having some sort of plastic, some polyurethane in there somewhere. And I would Google these products and I would go 5-10 pages into the search results and still be finding the same regurgitated press release over and over again. Every blog was quoting the same talking points using the exact same verbiage. And I was like, okay, well, this is already not good. But if you were an average person who was like, I wonder if Piñatex is plastic free, you wouldn't find that information without really digging. And ultimately where I found it was on these company websites by digging very deeply into parts of the website that most customers aren't going to look at. And that's when I found time and time again that these all had a polyurethane top layer that gave it that leather-like texture and finish. And so these products were not biodegradable, and I would argue only slightly better than pure 100% plastic vegan leather, The
key problem there is that the average person doesn't have or doesn't want to spend the time doing the digging like that you did. That's the key problem, right? Is like right. They want an answer fast. And the answer that they're getting quickly in this case, like, is not good.
Yeah, exactly. It's just the same thing over and over again. And it's not like, the Cactus Leather Company paid for all those blog posts, but they sure did supply the talking points. So they just kept coming up, and none of those blogs were interested in asking, or maybe they didn't know enough about how this product is made to ask, is it 100% biodegradable? Is it plastic free?
Yeah, I don't. Well, not to throw a wrench in the fire here, but actually they might have paid for those.
Oh, really? Right? Interesting.
Yes, yeah. With press, that is something else I've learned from doing this, is because we've had a decent amount of press, usually, honestly, mostly like a lot of podcast features. We've been featured in Forbes, like a few other things, and like, magazines, newspapers, and things. And I've obviously explored, other press, because press is great. It helps you tell your story. Helps people discover your brand. So right, it helps people learn about Eco-Stylist. But what I've learned from that is that you can pay for a lot of press. Press, yeah, there's a lot of pay to play in press, including press release distribution. So the thing is, like, while press releases, it's not like, while they're still distributed in, I guess you almost call it the old-fashioned way now, where like, you have a cool story and people share it because it's interesting and worth learning about. That still happens, but there's also something else that's happening a lot, which is that people are paying for press release distribution. And yeah, so that's just something else to be wary of, which I think, I don't really know the money trail behind this one, but I would venture to guess it's there. When you think about like H&M, for example, right? We with H&M greenwashing, and this is often the case with them. Like when they do greenwashing, they'll claim something super sustainable. They'll put out a press release, and then like WWD, I think sometimes like Teen Vogue, like all these publications, like USA Today, like they'll pick it up and just regurgitate it. And I would be willing to venture that at least, if not all, like some of those placements, were paid, or somebody was paid, to like, and so like it's not a coincidence that those press releases are just being picked up and regurgitated. And also, if a publication wasn't being paid, they probably would like fact check it. So I don't know. Just
that's a really good point.
To think about.
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right. That was really naive of me to assume that, because I actually know from my experience working in the industry that the like digital press, because who buys newspapers that often anymore, or actual magazines? So most promotion, most news about fashion and apparel is happening online. And I saw a shift even in my career. Like in the early days, all you had to do was like send Refinery 29 some photos, and they would be like, oh, cool, can we borrow these samples? They would shoot it and it would be on their site, right? It turned into like, actually, we can't do anything unless there's an affiliate link, like something that's going to drive some revenue. So basically they were saying like, you can pay us to run something, or you can give us a percentage of everything that's sold through the click-through links in this article that we'll write for you to make money. I mean, like that sounds so cynical and depressing. And I'm not saying all of Refinery 29's content is like that, but if you go look at their website, or anyone else who's playing in this space, you start to see very clearly there might be articles about why you should vote. Then there's going to be an article about the 10 hottest Memorial Day sales, and you can put all the content into two buckets. Like, this was organic, something they were interested in writing about. This is something they wrote for money. It becomes very clear, which makes it even harder, to suss it all out.
No, exactly. And no, and I mean, to be honest, like I didn't really know or suspect that with press releases. Like that wasn't intuitive to me. I mean, I kind of discovered that. I discovered that because USA Today reached out to me and was like, or actually, I should say, to be more exact, a PR firm did. But for an article in USA Today, and they were like, "Here's an article that what was it like? It was like top 10, like I don't know, like sustainable or like fashion leaders to be like looking out for in 2021." Like $2,500 for a spot in this article. And I was like, I was like, if you acknowledged us for that spot and wanted to write about us, cool. But like, I don't really think I should be paying you for that.
Yeah,
like, and giving this,
weird.
Yeah, I was like, I don't like personally. And that was a little grayer, in terms of ethics, because it wasn't like, if it was like, but if it like, just think about it, if the slant had been slightly more, like what if it had been like the, like top 10 sustainable startups or something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because that puts that then gives the impression that we at Eco-Stylist are super sustainable, and we are. But the point is, like, I shouldn't be paying for it. Like, if that's true, like that should be recognized in a way that I'm not paying for it, because that's a big ethical question, right? Like, I shouldn't be paying for a top 10 position like that. Because anyway, that just muddies the water quite a lot. And so that's just the kind of what we find ourselves in with PR, which was to my surprise as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so another sign of greenwashing that kind of is a part of that is this very black and white thinking. Like, you were like, H&M will come out with this, like, look at this perfect sustainable thing we did. And that's all you read are these very absolute, very black and white stories about sustainability. This idea that it's either perfectly sustainable or it's not sustainable at all. And the reality is that most of this, sustainability itself is so gray area, and mostly gray area specifically now, because for, say, H&M to do this 100% perfectly sustainable thing, that would be more than just making stuff out of recycled cotton. It would mean paying all their workers a living wage and changing the means of shipping and all of these other things that there's no way they're doing because it's too difficult. And so when you see a really loud public declaration of we're the most sustainable brand or something, you should automatically distrust whatever they're about to tell you next.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the reason we're getting on the case of brands like H&M and Zara and stuff is not because, like, obviously progress is important, right? And real progress should be acknowledge, I just want to point out that like we're not like, and nobody's perfect. Like no brand is
Right.
perfect. Our brands have room for improvement, and we footnote that. So yeah, we're not promoting this idea of eco perfectionism, right? We just want to help people support genuinely good brands that we believe in, that it's worth your time to believe in and support. And the problem with fast fashion, and the reason we're so hard on them, is because it's because, to your point, like it's because they're not addressing the biggest elephant in the room, which is their business model, right? Like, and honestly, I would be extremely happy if H&M and Zara like paid living wages. I mean, I would view that as like a big step in the right direction. But even that, like, and like, I mean, that would, I don't know, that would be surprising. It would make me pretty happy. But the thing is, even that though, they'd still be pretty far behind, a lot of the brands that we work with because of their overconsumption model, right? Which is the biggest unsustainable thing they do. And that is like produce a new collection every single week, have like hundreds and thousands of new items every month. That whole mass consumption model still puts them like far behind the brands that we work with who aren't doing that. They're not like they're saying like, here's a product that was made better. And maybe it costs a little more so we can pay our people fairly, but also like we're not trying to get you to buy it once a week. Like we're encouraging you to spend less money actually over time, because maybe it's more money per item, but you're buying less items. You're not buying a new outfit every week. And so yeah, so if that's the biggest problem with fast fashion, is that's the elephant in the room, that it's like, it's cool that you guys are doing like these small things, but you're still like miles behind because of that one massive thing you're not addressing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that if H&M came out and said like, listen, we are aware that the entire business model of fast fashion is not sustainable by its very nature of being fast fashion. Here are the things that we're trying to work on. It's going to take us a while to get there. And here's our plan for doing that. I would be like, fuck yeah, take my money, H&M. But that's not what they're doing. They're like, oh my God, we're so sustainable now. Come and shop.
Unfortunately, I know their response to this, because I had the unfortunate pleasure of reading this in a press release. When they were called out on their business model, their CEO said, I can't remember it word for word, but essentially the gist of what he said, which goes right back into our conversation, is when confronted about their business model being unsustainable, they said like it's their mission to make clothing, more affordable and accessible for the world. Which is bullshit. Like, and it goes right back to our point about that like price emotion thing, right? Like their way of like skirting around their unsustainability, their unethics, their way of like not being responsible for all of that is being like, well, hey, we're doing you a favor by by making this t-shirt, more affordable for you, which is a lie. It hits on like that price emotion thing for us again. And the other thing, which I saw somebody, I think it was Aja Barber or an influencer called this out recently. I think I saw it on Instagram, where she was like fast fashion isn't like it's not succeeding because of poor people, right? Which is the unsaid thing that's being said there, right? It's like if fast fashion is important because it's affordable, right? Suggesting that it's like people who like have less income need fast fashion. That's obviously BS, because these brands, which are multi-billion-dollar brands, are being supported by lots of middle and upper class people. So like that whole thing is a lie, right? We need to
No, definitely. This is one of those myths that I've been really trying to dismantle, because there is this belief, and it's interesting, it's not coming from people who are actually poor in general, that we need to perpetuate fast fashion to ensure that poor people can still have clothing. And I'm like, H&M doesn't become a billion-dollar company because poor people are buying clothes. It's because middle and upper middle class people are buying tons of clothes all the time.
Yes.
And we can see a through line in our own behavior as consumers in the era of fast fashion, as we started buying more and more and more clothing, because we could go to Forever 21 and drop $100 and leave with 2 bags of clothes. That's how fast fashion made its fortune, not on poor people having access to $5 t-shirts. I hate that H&M is using that against us. That, that belief that poor people need fast fashion. They're like weaponizing it. It's like they're going into Instagram and finding the hottest takes and turning it into a marketing message. I hate it.
Yeah. Well, it's also like ridiculous, because it positions it in a way that like they're doing something good for the world. but when
They're not.
which is like,
Spoiler.
which they are absolutely, yeah, spoiler alert, yeah, exactly. And when you look at their, I really applauded Remake for this when they, I actually put out 2 YouTube videos, one on H&M and one on Zara, and I shared Remake's work on this in both of them. But that is that, they had these really great campaigns recently calling out big brands where they pointed out like the profit of the people, the salaries and the net worth of the people at the top. Which is like, if anything, to me, that's like the most damning evidence that these brands are not doing this, certainly not doing it for poor people, right? Or like, which is like, is they're positioning that statement, or like for people who are less fortunate, like that's a bunch of BS, right? Like they're obviously doing it. There's extreme income inequality in these brands, like the founders are worth billions of dollars. And first of all, if they were doing it for income inequality, then like, I think that makes me really mad, because if that's actually why they were doing it, they would pay their workers fairly.
Exactly.
If that's why they were doing it, like number one, they would pay people a living wage. Yeah. But like, besides that, like, look at the families running these companies like Zara and H&M, multi-billion-dollar families. So like, yeah. So when you look at that, it's like, okay, we know why you're doing this. Like, it's not to help the world.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Totally. It's so silly. Another way to spot greenwashing is what Greenpeace calls ad bluster, which I know when I told you this term, you really loved it. I can't unsee it since I've learned the term ad bluster. And basically that's when a retailer or a brand just goes on like a mega marketing blitz with some quote sustainable thing that they did. I use Nike as an example. They'll do a collection of recycled sneakers, and it is all I will read about everywhere on the internet for like 3 weeks. And they often are spending more money on all of that advertising and marketing than they are on any other actual sustainability initiatives. And so when I see things like that, I mean, H&M, we're going to talk about H&M even more. Get ready in a few. But when I see, like, for example, Nike going so hard on this one collection that was maybe 1,000 sneakers, maybe less, 500. Nike makes millions and millions of sneakers every year. Like, that tiny collection is such a drop in the bucket. We're not talking about the vast majority of what they're making. It gives customers that warm and fuzzy feeling that Nike is a company worth supporting. But the reality is, like, if you just go to Foot Locker and buy a pair of Nikes, those aren't sustainable. I would question the sustainability of these so-called recycled sneakers either. That's a whole other thing I could dissect. But it's just that it's taking something so small and blowing it up until it's anything. It's all anyone's talking about. And, H&M is a great example of that. Like, I generally don't want to think about H&M, but unfortunately, H&M makes that impossible by invading the internet every few months with some collection.
They've been doing it almost in a more subconscious way, which is like through influencers, right? That's their big thing now, is H&M, works with these influencers now to specifically promote their sustainability initiatives, which makes people feel better about H&M and view them as a more sustainable brand than they are. That's actually why I made these videos about H&M and Zara, because I felt like it was the right time to just put out a reminder of how these brands are actually doing on a sustainability spectrum, because they're working really hard and paying lots of influencers to convince you that that's not the case. Like that they're becoming more sustainable brands and brands worth supporting. And H&M released this Billie Eilish collection. I don't remember, it was quite a while ago, I think over a year ago now. They released this Billie Eilish collaboration, which they do with many artists. They release, collections of clothing. But the thing is that they were claiming that it was there was this really audacious claim, like something about it being 100% sustainable, right, in their press release.
Yeah.
And the reason I say it like that is because you're not going to be able to find it because they deleted the press release, is the thing. So things got really shady really fast. So what happened is they put out this press release, they made these really audacious claims, and this kind of is full circle of a lot of things we've been talking about, multiple, it was literally like Teen Vogue, WWD, a slew of other publications literally just regurgitated that press release, did not fact check it or question it. I think maybe one of them had edited it post criticism to reflect that they thought about it. The funny thing was H&M then I think started to receive heat. So they deleted the press release, but all the articles were still out there.
Oh yeah, they're still out there. I just Googled it. It's like, here's one from Pop Sugar. It says, every item in this collection is made from sustainably sourced materials, so you can rest easy knowing your purchase hasn't negatively impacted Mother Earth. How awesome is that? Just like,
Yeah. So obviously this like fired me up, and when I looked into it, things just got worse. Like I looked through the website, I looked through the collection. It's in our article, so I think it was like 80% of the pieces in that collection like weren't even made with sustainable fabrics. So I didn't even know where they were getting these numbers from. Like the vast majority of the collection was just like, synthetics, like oil derived virgin materials. And it just, so it was like really confusing, like where they were getting the evidence for the claims that they made. And there was just, things got like really sketchy really fast, including their behavior with like deleting the press release and things. So we wrote this article about it where we were just like, hey, you can't come out and say stuff like this and not support it with evidence. Like if you're going to claim this collection is sustainable, like we'd like to know why and how, because like this is what we found and it wasn't very sustainable. So we basically put that on an article, and then a podcast interviewed us about it. And we had a great conversation with them, and they did their own digging too after our conversation, and they found some interesting things as well that were just, basically just reiterating how shady it was, like just some shady decisions by H&M in terms of their behavior around this collection. And so, and I think, and the thing is, like I said, that was just one example, like just one collection of what I think H&M does all the time. We really hoped that we were going to be able to share this article with like Billie Eilish fan communities, and that they would be on board to support it. We kind of got an opposite reaction, unfortunately, because I think that they obviously sometimes any form of criticism can be perceived as like a criticism of the artist or the person, and that's actually not. Our article didn't criticize Billie Eilish at all, because what we found in all of this digging is that like most likely Billie Eilish, first of all, probably didn't even have a say in the collection, and probably wasn't allowed to critique the collection, right? Mm-hmm. Because of like contracts, and probably like, her producers probably signed the contract, because they have those rights. And so she probably had little or nothing to do with the collection other than needing to comply with it. And so like, while it would have been nice if she spoke out of it, she probably couldn't. The thing is about this is H&M really though used her image as being like, somebody who cares about the environment, to their advantage, to greenwash. And so like, that's really the story we wanted to tell, is like, what H&M was doing there and how that was irresponsible.
Oh, yeah. I mean, H&M is 100% at fault here, because I've worked on collabs like this at some of my jobs, and ultimately the celebrity or whoever, the person, the brand, whatever that we're collaborating with, they'll get sign off on how the final samples look and feel. They might give some buy-in on silhouette or colors, but they 100% have no idea what kind of fabrics we're using. They don't know the true sustainability or lack of sustainability of the line. And they're not even really allowed to control any of that. And most certainly, Billie Eilish was contractually obligated to not question any of it publicly. I'm sure privately she was mortified. I do think H&M is such a great example of how these brands in partnership with mass media can really perpetuate greenwashing and make it more factual than it really is. I think H&M being, obviously one of the biggest ones out there, they are so smart about weaponizing sustainability in tandem with pop culture, but they're also so responsible. I put them up there before any other retailer in terms of reinforcing this myth of clothing recycling and circularity in a multitude of ways. One is the dropping off your clothes at the store and getting the coupon for the discount. They tell you that these clothes are going to be recycled. The reality is that most of these clothes are either shredded up or head to developing countries where they become their pollution problem. We have more episodes coming in the future about that, but H&M is not recycling those clothes that you give them to recycle. And then there's the Loooooop machine.
Something I thought was really interesting is when H&M started this take back program and there was no Loooooop machine, right? I remember reading this article about like how, H&M started this program and they collected all these clothes, and now they just have like warehouses full of clothes they didn't actually know what to do with. And I just remember reading that story and being like, are you kidding me? Like you had a program where you claimed you were going to be recycling the clothes and you didn't even have like a plan for like how or what you were going to do with them.
I know. I mean, for a company that size, that's mortifying. I'm like, what happened there?
Yes. Yeah, like I think that just reinforces your point that like that was really a sales tactic, like of like come into our store and get a coupon so you can buy more stuff you don't need, and not actually like a genuine effort to be more sustainable.
Oh, absolutely not. No. It wasn't a good faith project. You know what I mean? Like they weren't thinking this through at all. So I noticed like in the past couple of years, there were more stories sort of popping up just here and there, not as many as you would think, that were picking holes in this take back recycling illusion that H&M was perpetuating. There are articles here and there of like, what's really happening to your clothes? We traced it, that kind of thing. But you have to dig for them or like really search exact terms to get there. But H&M definitely became aware that, the end was nigh. It was going to come. People were going to start talking about this illusion they were already selling us. So they came out with the Loooooop machine, which for like 2 weeks is all I saw on Instagram, in any of the fashion media, in sustainability media. The Loooooop machine, which has many O's in it. I think there's only one, and it's in Europe somewhere in a store. It's one machine where if you can go watch a video of it on the H&M website, where basically you put in a garment, the machine cleans and disassembles it into the original thread yarn, and then re-knits a new t-shirt, basically, right? The idea is that this Loooooop machine is going to save the world, and that we can all buy all the H&M clothes we want and just feed them into the Loooooop machine when we're done. So I was telling Garik before we started recording that I went on a rampage today trying to debunk the Loooooop machine because all I've found all over the internet is like, this is the future. So first off, the thing about the Loooooop machine is that it can only recycle very simple knit garments. So it can't do like a woven blouse. It couldn't do something that had like zippers and buttons and stuff like that. It certainly couldn't recycle your like faux leather jacket. So it's very limited in terms of what it can do. Second, it takes 5 hours for the Loooooop machine to recycle one garment. Like, how is that a solution? You know what I mean? Like, that's not a viable solution at the rate that we consume clothing right now.
Yes. Yeah. No. And this goes right back to my point about H&M's collaborations with influencers. Because isn't it like Macy Williams, I think, on is that how you say her name, on Instagram? Like she collaborated with H&M and did this video about the Loooooop machine that's like no, which is exactly what you said. It's like highly suggestive that this is going to like save the world.
Yeah, but realistically, it can recycle 4 very simple knit garments per day, and we're consuming, probably. I wouldn't be surprised if we were consuming several million garments a day. Well, no, way more than that, because I want to say we're buying anywhere from 80 to 150 billion garments per year. So as you can see, 4 garments a day doesn't really put a dent in that. It also perpetuates this idea that clothes are made by robots. It doesn't surprise me that H&M leaves humans out of the Loooooop machine, because H&M doesn't want us to ask about their workers, right? And one of the things that I always pick apart in anybody's sustainability message is the invisibility of the human element of making those clothes. All of these brands focus on the environmental impact, whether truthfully or fictionally. They never talk about the workers, because I think, you can tell me what you think here, by doing that, it would be confessing that for years and decades, these companies made billions off of exploiting humans.
Yes, no, facts. This actually makes me more angry about H&M than like almost anything else, and that is that. And I called this out in our like in our YouTube video about H&M, which is the fact that they promised to pay living wages. I think it was in 2018, 2017, 2018, 2018, I think. They had promised to pay living wages to their workers. It came and went, and here we are, 2021, still hasn't happened. Like, we're still waiting, but I'm not holding my breath because I haven't seen any like strong or tangible initiatives on that front from them. So I don't think there's progress happening. And the thing that makes me really mad is a hypothesis that I have that you're hitting on about the robots, which is that like this is what I think is going to happen, and for sure with H&M and probably with other fast fashion as well, and that is that they exploit people, right? Like you pointed, they have exploited many, many people. They continue to exploit people. They refuse to pay. They refuse to just own up to it and pay living wages, right? And then what's going to happen is in their long-term vision, they're going to replace those people with robots, like literally, because that's right. Because that's if we look at like 3D printing of clothing, like this technology is like on the horizon. So they are going to replace those humans with robots. And between now and then, they will not pay those people a living wage. So they will basically just have exploited millions of people to make their clothes. And then they will switch to robots. And to me, that is like the biggest slap in the face. It's like you couldn't like rather than like, oh, and nothing makes me angrier about them than that. Is like, and again, I hope that doesn't happen, but that's my hypothesis, and that's what's been kind of like I really think that's where they're going, is that they will just continue to put this off as long as they can, work on their public image, try to make people feel good about them, and then replace humans with robots, never having done right by the people that they've been wronging for decades. And I think that's to me, that's the number one reason why I believe that nobody should support them. Or brands like them, because because at the end of the day, that's just like from an ethical perspective, that's pretty terrible.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, as a reminder for everybody listening, when we talk about sustainability and true sustainability, not the word as it's been marketed, but the actual meaning, it's really about embracing and embodying the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And believe it or not, half of those goals are related to people and ending poverty and in general, giving everybody a better life, right? It's not 100% about environmentalism. Unfortunately, these retailers they're not even truly solving the environmental impact around clothing at all, like these large fast fashion retailers, but they're also just ignoring the human side of it. And we see that time and time again, like the whole pay up movement was basically retailers erasing the humans from the equation. And, some retailers were like, oh shit, like people are starting to pick up on this fact that we canceled all these orders and people are starving because of it. We'll pay them back. But even those brands, like say the Gap, who agreed to pay all of those canceled orders, they didn't say, and on top of that, we're going to start paying people a living wage. Like no one's doing that. Even if a brand gave in and agreed to pay up, they're not currently paying up to the level they should be. And that it's not even just the workers making our clothes. It's also the people working in their stores and warehouses. Those people also are often barely getting by, living paycheck to paycheck. And meanwhile, then you've got, some of the wealthiest people in this world are at the helms of these fast fashion brands.
Yes, no, literally the wealthiest in the world. I'm glad you brought up the SDGs, because actually the SDGs that we're most focused on, they actually are focused on people, right? It's SDG 8, which is decent work and economic growth, because we're looking at brands that provide good jobs, that pay living wages, right? And then the other one is 12, which is responsible consumption, right? Mm-hmm. Which is where a huge problem in fashion, where fast fashion is irresponsible consumption. Yeah. So those are actually the SDGs that we're most focused on. Like obviously climate change is one of them and it's important, but like where we see ourselves as having the most impact on SDGs is actually those two. Because it's the overconsumption problem that's really unsustainable. And then needing to provide good jobs and not jobs that pay really low wages.
Absolutely. And that involves changing their entire business model. It doesn't mean, well, as you know, because you work with brands who are abiding by these goals, it doesn't mean that a business can't be successful. But unfortunately, if you've been adopting this business model now for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, it's not like you can flip a switch overnight and suddenly be sustainable and ethical. And once again, like if these brands were transparent about that and identified a path forward, I would be really excited and supportive. But instead, what we get is a lot of claims that don't really have a basis in anything. But let's talk a little bit about what you think are some of the brands that might be surprising to listeners that you think are the biggest culprits of greenwashing. We know H&M and Zara are up there on the list. But I know that there are other brands that people might be surprised to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can probably divert from talking about fast fashion here for a little bit because we talked about them quite a lot. And we already mentioned Everlane, so I think we've probably touched on how and why they're guilty of greenwashing. So some other ones that might surprise people, and would be, well, let's just start with Allbirds as for one example.
Yes. Yes.
And that one, obviously, this one's pretty gray, right? Because from an environmental perspective, Allbirds does great things. They are a B Corp. But this is why, something that we've been saying, and in conjunction with Remake, because I mean, this is like in Remake's criteria, there's not a space for B Corp where it's just like, 20 points. Because the reality is you can't, like, being a B Corp, and don't get me wrong, being a B Corp is fantastic. Like, it's obviously, I'd love to see companies moving towards being social enterprises. Like, we're probably going to be a B Corp at some point. But I just want to pause for a moment to say that, like, but that being a B Corp, though, from like a perspective of like, like Amanda, like you or I, or like if we're trying to look for like a sustainable or ethical brand, simply the brand being a B Corp isn't really enough. And I think people don't know that. Like, I think people, they kind of assume that it is. And that's not the reality, because it doesn't tell us the key information we want, right? Like, for me, like, one of the key pieces I want to know is like fair wages, and simply being a B Corp doesn't guarantee that a brand pays fair wages, and that's what we find with Allbirds. So yeah, it's like they, like, while they do a lot of things for the environment and they're a B Corp, I think, okay, I just want to point out for a second here, because I don't know if people realize this, they're valued at over $1 billion. Okay, so Allbirds is no longer the tiny startup that I think people imagine them as. They are a very wealthy company, and so they should be leading on this. Like, right, like, we cannot accept silence from a company this large on their people, and that is exactly what they've given us. They've given us silence. Like, where's their transparency pages on their website? Where do they talk about fair wages, certifications for their factories? They don't talk about those things, and it's especially relevant as Allbirds expands beyond shoes. Like, that's because they're like, oh, we're gonna have like underwear and shirts and stuff, and it's like, okay, well, if you're gonna, like, but it was never okay, to be clear. Like, when they just did shoes, it was not okay either. But it's like, now they're venturing into clothing. And so it's like, come on, like, we need to know, this information. I mean, and again, like, I don't have any insights into their supply chain, but it definitely makes you wonder, if they have something to hide, being like how long they've been around. The worst thing about them not talking about their people is that they are literally in a leadership position as a company that's sustainable and a B Corp and as successful as they are. They're literally like, people are looking to them as to be the example, and they are falling short. And that is like, I'm sorry, that's like that. They have a lot of responsibility, and they're not doing what they should be with that responsibility. And I think that we should be like, people should be mad.
Absolutely. And like, to be clear, they are aware of this. This is not like they are just like working so hard on the environmental side that they forgot about the people side. And when you see any of these brands crowing about all of their environmental achievements, if they're not talking about the human side of it, that's because they know that they're not delivering there. Like, or they would be yelling about it at, like, off the rooftops, Like, this is something that they are very aware of, and I am concerned. That's an understatement. I'm irate that they don't talk about it or address it.
Yeah, I think the reason that we're both hitting on this as being so important is because if they don't do this, and they see, the problem with Allbirds is that people are still convinced. Like, people are like, oh, like, we wrote this article, and it honestly, we kind of put it out into the world to like meager reception. Like, people were, because I think people, like, I think it's kind of one of those things where people didn't really want to hear it. Like, they were like, okay, they were like, this is really interesting information, but like, I don't really want to believe this because I like Allbirds. And unfortunately, but that's the danger, right? If Allbirds can get away with this, and people can say like, well, you know what, it's okay, I still believe Allbirds is a good brand, then that sets the precedent for more greenwashing and for other brands to do the same thing. And it goes directly against progress, right? Of what we want brands to be doing. Like, we want brands to be, right? Like, what the whole point of like Fashion Revolution, and like Remake and all of this, right? All of this work is like for brands to be more transparent so that people aren't being exploited. And Allbirds is like directly working against that, actually, by being like, well, we're special, so we can get away with this, and also, yeah, and then like lowering the bar for what people will believe is ethical and sustainable.
Yeah. I mean, and it makes me angry, because I see how they manipulate people. And I think that Allbirds is one of those brands that people generally look to as being like an example of how a company could be sustainable and successful. And they're not actually sustainable. I don't think that they would be less successful by actually being sustainable, but they have chosen that route. And I can't believe that. Wow, you just blew my mind that they're valued at $1 billion. That is, I've always been really skeptical of them anyway, because I felt like they spent way too much money on store experience and not enough on product. But talk about the effect of this kind of buzz that it can have on a business and allow it to grow in this exponential way. Very, very disheartening. So another one that you had mentioned to me was alternative apparel. And
Yes.
I think of them as the like original sustainable clothing brand. Not, I know someone's going to call in and be like, no, actually the original was this, but like they were adopting sustainability language, if you will, well before anyone else.
Alternative apparel has been around for a while, and I believe they've been promoting the idea of, sustainability within fashion since like the 90s.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken. And so you're right in the sense that like they, in that respect, they were a leader, on this front. And, they're a brand that used to pass remakes criteria, actually. So like actually considered, a sustainable brand. I thought of like, honestly, before we wrote this article and did our rating on them, I thought of them as such. Because like I said, because they had that precedent where they had passed the criteria. And so the reason this story is really interesting is because it's where things start to change that this story gets interesting. Where things start to change is 2017, when Hanes purchased alternative apparel.
Which I think most people wouldn't know.
Most people do not, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it was roughly, it's in our article, but I think it was roughly 50 million. I can't quite remember the number. But so an acquisition happened there. And that's where things started to change. So basically, yeah, things just started to go downhill from there. Like one example, they used to use more than 50% of their fabrics were sustainably sourced, like actually not the way the H&M says. And then like post the Hanes acquisition, that changed. Like you started to see, less and less. And I even like had responded to some things on their website where like they would say something as cotton or polyester. And I was like I remember being really surprised because like, I've known alternative apparel for years. So I'd like message them and be like, is this organic cotton or like, is this recycled polyester? And you're just not telling me. And they were like, no, it's, just, and I remember feeling really confused. I was like, what's happening to you guys? Like you guys were, and so basically, yeah, they just kind of degraded and I think are continuing to. So when we evaluated them at that point, they failed and our criteria. And it was just sad to see because it also appeared that when I remember in doing our research that they were looking to like integrate their supply chain more with Haines's, which as you can imagine is not going to be a good thing for them from a sustainability perspective. So yeah, so really a sad story there because you had a brand that was doing good and could have like continued to be a great brand. But unfortunately, also a side note that I personally think is interesting is when I was in LA I've been to LA a couple of times for sustainable fashion events, actually. And one of the times that I was there, I randomly, like I didn't plan it because I just had so much else to do for this event, but I just walked into like multiple of our brand partners, they're in LA, and was like, hey, can I shoot a YouTube video? And they were like, yes. So I shot a YouTube video in Nudie Jeans store, where I like interviewed the manager there, and I just love how they like repair the jeans right on site. And Nudie Jeans is a great brand. And like I popped into what other stores I pop into at that time, Industry of All Nations passed our criteria. They no longer do, but and then there was like a couple of who else did I pop in on? Like Tact and Stone is a brand that we love that's in LA. I popped in there and interviewed the founder. And so we were just popping in stores, and Alternative Apparel was the only one this was pre-article. They were one of our brand partners at this time, before we had reevaluated them. And I popped into their store and they were like, no.
Wow.
And, they were the only one that said no. And they had to contact corporate, which was Hanes, to like, to get approval. And then of course they came back and said no. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting anecdote to my experience there, because literally like every other brand was like, go for it.
Yeah, I think that doesn't surprise me. Like 20 companies make 97% of total fashion industry profits for the whole world. And Hanes is number 20. So just probably not a company that a lot of us think about a lot, especially when we think about fast fashion. We're thinking about like Zara and H&M and whatnot, but like Hanes is a major player in this world, and the sheer volume of t-shirts and underwear and socks and God knows what else they're churning out is very impactful. If they became a truly sustainable company, that would have a major impact on the industry and the world. Instead, what we're seeing is that they are buying companies that are doing good things and making them do less good things. So something you mentioned was that, I forget what brand you said, but that they no longer met your criteria. Why does that happen? Why would a brand meet your criteria and then not meet it anymore?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And the particular brand I mentioned is a really interesting case,
Okay.
because it's not like, because they're not greenwashing, and they're doing a lot of things well. Is really more of an unfortunate case. But yeah, so that was Industry of All Nations, was a brand that, but usually, so I'll just say up front, like 90% of the time that we approve a brand and then we like reevaluate them, say like a year later, and they fail and we have to remove them, it's because of like cases like alternative apparel, right, where they're becoming less sustainable instead of more sustainable. So progress is obviously important for sustainable brands. If they're not making progress, never a good sign. Unfortunately, those stories never end well in my experience.
Yeah.
So basically that's usually the case, is that they are in decline. But occasionally other things happen. And so with Industry of All Nations, it was really a situation of, so Remake redid their criteria, I think it was about a year ago, to include diversity, equity, and inclusion in their criteria. And that was a category where Industry of All Nations fell quite short. And so it kind of like Reformation, honestly, where they had some issues on that front. So interesting anecdote there you'll notice, though, is Reformation actually does currently pass Remake's criteria, and actually is one of our brand partners. This isn't cancel culture in terms of like how we view brands.
Right,
so like with
right.
Reformation, the reason that you'll see them as like a Remake approved brand, and the reason you'll see them on our website, is because they actually they made real mistakes. Like that's the thing. They actually really were screwing up. But the thing is, they actually took tangible efforts to fix those, and ones that I think Remake and us like believed were that they meant, right? Obviously, time will tell. Like we reevaluate brands regularly. But the thing is with them, it's like these efforts seem legit. Like they really are trying to change things, because they actually did a lot. Reformation did a lot to actually like invoke change. So it was like, okay, we can believe this. But with Industry of All Nations, they had some similar issues on the diversity, equity, and inclusion front, and there was no action whatsoever to correct those mistakes or change them. And so it was close. Like it was a close fail. It wasn't like a massive fail. Brands need to earn 50 points or more to pass our criteria. And the reality is, like, if a brand earns 50 points, that's like a lot. So this is all the criteria. Like that's actually a lot of good, because like 9 points are for living wages. The diversity, equity, inclusion category, which is combined with leadership, is worth 8 points. So that's like if a brand is, if they have like people of color in senior leadership positions, if they have a diversity policy that they share. The sustainability part is like if they promote slowing down consumption, right? That's like 8 points. There's like 4 points for having a circularity initiative. I'm just giving some examples, but basically brands need to earn 50 points, which is a lot of good. But most brands that do pass, they have like 50 something points, right? So like say 54. So I can't remember Industry of All Nations score, but let's say it was like 55. Then when the criteria shifts, that can be enough to push them below 50. They maybe like say they have 8 points less. Now they're at 40 something. And the one thing that we do look at too is like if a brand isn't giving us like a reason to want to believe in them or that they're making progress, we're not going to like pursue trying to get them over the line. You know what I mean? So like in their case, their silence on those issues was alarming. So we didn't follow up with it. And when I say about pushing brands over the lines, what I mean is like occasionally we will reach out to brands that are close to passing, and we'll ask them. We'll say like, you're missing a lot of information on your website, basically, is what we'll tell them. And, we'll ask them what they're doing on those things and if they can put them on their website, because a lot of times, especially smaller sustainable brands, they don't necessarily know what information they should be sharing with people. So we've had brands that were like made in the USA that paid, 1.5 or 2 times minimum wage. And that information wasn't on their website. We talked to them. They told us that. They also put that on their website, and then that that helped push them over the line. So we'll have cases like that. But back to them. Yeah. So basically, that was an unfortunate case where like Industry of All Nations does a lot of cool things in terms of sustainability and ethics. That was really disappointing for me, honestly, because they're a brand that's very thoughtful. Like, I visited their store. They're very, very thoughtful into the finer details, like the finer details of sustainability. But there's what I would describe as a leadership problem. There.
Yeah, that's what I was expecting you were going to say. Really, really disappointing. And hopefully they'll hear enough from customers that they'll be forced to address that. Because I would agree. I feel that they are very thoughtful in other matters. It's really disappointing.
Agreed. Yeah.
So what are the brands you recommend the most, or like your favorite brands, I guess I would say?
Yeah, my favorite brands. Let's see. So Outerknown is one of my favorite brands. I just love, I love their brand. They do so many great things. Like, for example, I'll just give some examples. So their jeans, they do a lifetime warranty on, which is super cool. Which makes them pretty affordable as well. I think their jeans are in the, depends on the type, but they're like in the $120 to $180 range, and they're made super sustainably, like at Cytex with, organic cotton and lifetime warranty. So like that's just one of the things they do, but just a very thoughtful brand, brand that's always making progress, which is what we like to see. We like to see brands that are doing things sustainably and ethically, but also like continuing to hold themselves to do more. Adelante Shoe Company, I have to give them a shout out. That's the first brand that I mentioned that I discovered. Met their founder by chance at a flea market, essentially in Boston, and I've been a huge fan ever since. They are one of the, if not the most progressive brand I've ever met on living wages. And I say that because of the thoughtfulness and the detail behind it. Like their factory that they own it themselves, is in Guatemala, and they were unhappy with any of the metrics out there, so they put together their own measure of what a living wage is in Guatemala. It's above everything else that they could base it on, and they're really transparent about it. Like, they're like, this is how much we pay our workers. They put out these awesome reports that measure like quality of life improvements of their workers, and they're really honest about it. Like, in one of the reports, there was a finding that like quality of life for the workers had actually reduced year over year in this one aspect. And so they were like, okay, we need to work on that for the next one, So like,
wow,
they're not just like lying. And what I mean by quality of life is they'll measure things like of our workers, how many can afford to send their like education for their children, and for how many of their children, right? Like they're measuring like these types of things, and they share this in their impact reports. And they, like I said, they don't sugarcoat it. Like if they actually regressed in some metric, and they own up to that. And so they're just like, I love them. They're just like great brand. Like obviously, like, I think I mentioned Nudie Jeans earlier is another one where they're like super serious. They're so serious about sustainability. I love it. Like, I love their energy. Like they're one of our silver brands, which I just want to point out, like, very few brands on our website are silver or gold, because those are extremely progressive categories. Like, those are really hard to earn that many points. It's very hard. So like very few brands are silver or gold. And these are like the best brands on the planet, right? Like we literally like, we say like 99% of brands fail our criteria, which is true. Because then like the vast majority of those brands never even get researched because they don't stand a chance, like brands like Shein that have 0 points.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. No chance.
Yeah. So like, but Nudie Jeans is silver, and they're so serious. Like, I remember when we shared our ratings with them, they're like already thinking like how they can do better, and looking at like all the different things, like it's like they're so serious. And it's just great to see that energy. And I've seen them improve over time as well. I love how they repair their jeans in store. Really inspiring.
I also just want to add on Nudie. My husband is a big, long-term devoted fan of Nudie, and he has had his jeans repaired by them, and they came back cooler and better than ever. And he's a buy one pair of jeans per year kind of guy and just wear them every day. I mean, the quality blows my mind. And yes, they are more expensive than going and buying a pair of jeans at like Old Navy or something, but they're well worth it. When I compare it to the like $100 stretchy, like skinny jeans that I used to buy, there's no competition in terms of quality and just looking good, really.
Yeah, no, 100%. We actually did some digging in because we were looking at like the quality of sustainable clothing versus unsustainable clothing and how that impacts price. And we dug through like a bunch of articles and we found a bunch of like tests that people did where they, would buy jeans for a year and stuff. And the thing is like, and there were some really like awesome examples because like the one you just mentioned, like where if he has one pair of jeans for that year and those costed him, with nudie jeans, probably, like $160 to $200 maybe if they were new, and not like their repaired selections, then yeah, versus like what some people have done, which is they buy like 4 pairs at like H&M or American Eagle or something,
exactly.
And that's $160 to $200 for those 4, and they run through those 4 pairs in a year, like that, like over and over again. We saw that in these articles where people ran these tests, like they ran through like all 4 in, and so it's like, so that's a perfect example of like where we just we definitely need to think twice about price, because it's like sustainable fashion isn't necessarily more expensive, right? Quality is like quality and buying less are both huge parts of that story.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a hard jump for some people to make because we've always had this idea that more is more and we should have a lot of clothes, and that like a huge closet is a sign of success and being stylish and whatnot. And ultimately, going back to this idea that I talked about earlier, or it's not even an idea, the reality that fast fashion has built these billion-dollar empires off of selling us lots of things. This is a good example. Rather than buying 4 or 6 pairs of jeans from H&M that are going to be garbage at the end of the year, buy one pair of really nice jeans that you can also get repaired. It's a life upgrade.
Yes. No, I love it. And in addition to that, like, it's also like if they do wear out to the point that you're like, you could get the free repairs, but you decide you don't want to because you're like, I don't really know if I want to wear these anymore. I mean, the really cool thing too, though, is it's not 4 pairs of jeans being thrown in the trash. It's nudie jeans taking them back from, if you decide you don't want them anymore, it's nudie jeans taking them back from you and either recycling them themselves or repairing them and reselling them in their store. So like, not only, is it better for the, for that whole journey, but there's also that circular component to it. So really just an awesome brand. One that I really believe in. I wanted to mention a couple other brands. Yeah. So a couple other brands that I find really inspiring for different reasons are, so Known Supply is one of our brand partners that I really love. They're the one I mentioned where like what I consider a true example of radical transparency in that they let you meet the person who made your clothes. I think that's so awesome. Like there's a tag on the inside of a shirt or a sweatshirt that has the name of the person who made your garment on it, and you can look that person up on their website, and you can learn a little bit about that person. And their factory is fair trade certified, so those people are treated well, paid fairly. So yeah, they're just a really cool brand that has done really well by people. And I know that their founder, I've interviewed and talked to their founder. He's really passionate about that. And so I think just awesome brand there. And then Asket is another brand on the transparency front that's really interesting to look at, because I think they're sort of another example of a brand that has more radical transparency, like an actual example of radical transparency compared to Everlane. That's a bit different. Like they don't do the meet the maker thing. What makes them unique is their honesty about their level of transparency is like super on point. And so that's what really I think makes them special, is they're like so what do I mean by that? So like a t-shirt that they sell, they'll be like, we have 80% transparency on this t-shirt. And they'll tell you like why and how and what that means. And that's rare. First of all, most brands don't even admit that. Like most brands don't even acknowledge
I
that they don't
know.
have full
Yeah.
transparency. Yeah, so like they actually risk like you thinking something bad about them as a result of that, because you might be like, because I think some people might be like, well, why don't you have complete transparency? And the reality is, most brands don't. And this is something we look at with the criteria is like, for sure, is like, it's because the first level is always the sewing part, right? We always look for that. It's like, obviously, like, do you know who's sewing your garments, and do you know if those factories are certified and if they're paid fairly? But there's other layers, right? There's like, do you know who grew the cotton? Do you know who dyed the fabric? Do you know where the buttons came from? Right? That's where Asket's looking when they say like 80%. That's what they mean. They're like, well, the 20% that's missing is like, we don't know where these zippers came from exactly, or like it can't be traced to a T. So like, yeah, and so I think that besides that being inspiring, it pushes them they do work to improve those things. So if it's at 60% for like a pair of jeans, they're obviously working to get that to 100. And so I just think that that's pretty cool. And they're also focused on timeless staple pieces. So definitely against the mass consumption model. And something else cool about Asket is they've been a menswear brand their entire life, but they're going to be adding women's clothes soon. So just like something kind of cool that'll be coming from them.
That's amazing. I mean, the transparency thing just kills me. I love it because I can say, having worked as a buyer, that the most amount of transparency I ever had into the product I was creating was probably like 5%. Like I would buy from a vendor who knows who their factory was really, and who knows if that factory was subcontracting. And that's just for the sewing. Like, forget about knowing where the fabric and all of the other trims came from. Like, impossible. I wouldn't even know about like who made the labels that were in them. I mean, once again, it would be really amazing if one of these larger fast fashion brands came out and said, hey, we actually don't know anything. Here's what we're going to do to get there, but instead it's been sort of like deflect or pretend it doesn't exist at all. I know, when we talk about weaker forced labor, a lot of brands have come out and been like, we had no idea, or like, we can guarantee that there's no weaker forced labor. And really, I'm more inclined to believe that they don't know than that they can guarantee it, because the transparency in the supply chain is just, it would require like doubling your staff, I think, to like keep an eye on it. So it's really exciting when a brand takes that really seriously. And to me, 60% transparency is radical, actually. Like, unheard of. I really doubt Everlane knows that much, despite, always showing the picture of someone who allegedly works in the factory.
Yeah.
Who's having a great time.
Yes. Yeah, and you're
like, who is that person?
Yeah, and you hit on a really good point that I want to touch on, because like I know this definitely gets into the gray area, but which is, I think, really important. With the forced labor in China, an interesting like anecdote to that story is, this is why it's really important that brands acknowledge when they make mistakes, because you're right, like no brand is immune to it. Like, it's not.
No one is, yeah.
And the perfect example of that is Patagonia, right? Because Patagonia was actually tied to that as well. Some of the cotton that they were sourcing from like Hong Kong was actually being sourced, from there, and and they weren't aware of it. And obviously, when they were made aware of it, they made changes to ensure, or at least to try their best, that won't happen again. Mistakes are going to happen, and I'm all about like letting companies like own those mistakes and make real progress. It's not just like forgive and forget. Like, obviously, no, not in fashion, because there's so much exploitation. But I definitely think we need to allow for the space for learning and growth and improvement. I've seen people be like, I'm never going to shop at Patagonia again, and I strongly disagree. I think that's a mistake, because Patagonia is a brand that has been around for 50 years. They're one of our approved brands. They do a lot of things really, really good. They obviously have a commitment to sustainability and ethics, as they've shown and like proven. Like it's important to them. They take a leadership position on it. They're also really big at this point. They're not a small company anymore, but they still make mistakes. And I think we have to give space for that. And they did, and they did. Like, they came out with a response. They were serious. If they had no response, or it had a response that was lackluster or lacked intention, obviously that would be a red flag and a point to be like, hey, should this brand still be passing our criteria? Should we still believe in them? With fashion being so complicated, the supply chains are massive, and so mistakes are going to happen. And it's about what brands do about it that matters, right? And it's about their intention and progress, not just the fact that they made a mistake. It's really like what they do about it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Especially like when we talk about anything supply chain driven, it is so complicated. It is so opaque that most brands have very, very little visibility into who made what they're selling you. And so for someone to very honestly come right out and say like, yeah, we messed up is to me incredible. And that's the opposite of greenwashing, right? Because greenwashing is really about making big bold statements with little to back it up that feel very unrealistic and sort of deny all the gray area that exists in the world of sustainable and ethical fashion. And so I like that makes me want to buy something from Patagonia, just hearing that, because that's what we need more of. That's actual radical transparency, not what Everlane's doing.
Yeah, exactly.
You're an expert here, and I think this is going to be a great takeaway for everyone listening. What do you suggest people do to avoid greenwashing and to ensure that they're buying product that represents their values?
I love that question. Yeah, I mean, I really suggest that people find and use a source that they trust. That is my number one recommendation. Like a source like Eco-Stylist, and obviously that's going to sound like a plug or like a bias, but that's really not how I mean that. The reason I say that is because as you and I know, like this. We've spent hundreds of hours, right? And as like sustainable fashion nerds, like we love that, but most people don't want to do that.
No, and I don't blame them.
Yeah, and nor should they. And some do. And if you do, if that is you, like if you're like us, that's fine. Like for sure, do your own. Like that's cool. If that's what you like to do. But I think for most people, they would probably rather be doing something else with their time, than digging into this stuff. So that would be my number one recommendation. Because of everything we talked about, because of how complicated it is, because of all the sources out there that you can't trust, unfortunately, I really think that's the best. That's the best way to go about it. Because like we talked about, like we put out articles on like what fabrics to look for and what certifications to look for, and certainly those are starting points and those are helpful. But kind of like we talked about, like just knowing like that the company's a B Corp, for example, isn't enough. And like fair trade certification is fantastic, but so few brands have it. I mean, it's fairly new to the clothing space, right? Fair trade is not new, but to clothing, it's fairly new. And there's tons of small brands that like, maybe they own their own factory and so they can't afford fair trade certification, but they're still awesome. So yeah, so that's like for all these reasons, like I would just really recommend having, a go-to resource that you trust for discovering brands and getting your information that way. I think it's the best way you can sift through all this noise. And something else I would just add here is that I want to talk about quickly is just this idea of like eco perfectionism too, right? I think that's a really important point. I think to finish on is, like obviously at Eco-Stylist and in partnership with Remake, we're holding brands to an incredibly high standard because we believe that brands should pay people fairly. They should be transparent. They should make their clothes more sustainably, right? Like this is the future that we want to live in. This is what we want to see. So, and I think it's really important to do that as individuals. We don't have to be perfect, like if we want to be more sustainable, be more ethical, or support brands that are, make those more conscious choices. It doesn't have to be an overnight thing where like you replace your old closet. Like I think it's all about just making better choices, and those better choices add up, and they don't all have to be perfect, right? Like for me, for example, like I thrift clothes, I support sustainable brands, I practice like not buying clothes for periods of time, like getting things that are damaged repaired instead of throwing them away, right? Things like this. So I think in the sustainable fashion journey it's all about just like making better choices when we can, and it's just the right choice for you at that moment, and right, like thrifting is a great choice if you want to do that, if you like doing that when you can, swapping, right, like supporting sustainable brands. I think it's not necessarily productive to compare these things, which I think is often done in these communities. Like I think it's better to acknowledge, I think, that they're all good for different reasons, and supporting the different ones when they make sense for us.
Agreed. It's a mix, right?
Yes.
Because if you set yourself up, going back to this idea of like black and white thinking, if you set yourself up to like things are clearly wrong or right or better or worse, and that you must pick one path and stick with that, what happens is you fail, and then you're disheartened, you're discouraged, and then you want to quit. And we can't do that. We have to recognize that it is hard. I mean, it's that whole, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. If you really adopted that, I don't know where you're going to live, what you're going to eat, how you're going to care for your pets, see a doctor, etc. I mean, this is one of those things that I, as a teenager, really had to wrap my brain around. I think a lot of people go through that, like, I'm going to be anti-capitalist in a really extreme way phase, and then you're like, oh shit, like that's not actually a sustainable way of life for me, because it's too black and white, and because you live in a system in which, unfortunately, it's really challenging to be anti-capitalist, and it's also very challenging to be 100% eco-perfect all the time.
Yes. No, I'm really glad you brought that up, because I have had so many of those conversations. So many of those conversations about good capitalism doesn't exist. It's all evil. We shouldn't buy anything new. Like, I've encountered so many of those conversations in these spaces, and I just think they're really counterproductive. I think there's a huge opportunity here for us to come together and change the fashion industry.
Thank you so much, Garik, for taking the time to talk to me. It was so fun. And yes, I mean that. It is so fun to talk about greenwashing with someone who enjoys busting greenwashers as much as me. Please go check out Garik's company, Eco-Stylist, at eco-stylist.com. And yes, I'll be sharing that in the show notes. You don't need to write that down right now. But you can use promo code Clotheshorse for 20% off any personal styling service. And I'll also be sharing that in the show notes. Basically, these are going to be some epic show notes, because I'll also be including links to a bunch of the stuff Garik and I discussed in this episode. There's so much for you to read and watch. Please go check it out. Before I wrap this all up, I hope you're not tired of listening to my voice yet. Hopefully you took my advice at the beginning and you've been pacing yourself. Anyway, let's recap the signs of greenwashing. First off, using words that just don't mean very much because they aren't measurable, but they sure do appeal to our desire to make the best decisions. This includes words like natural, green, eco-friendly, even organic. To be honest, when we talk about cotton, even if the cotton or other fiber is certified organic, that doesn't mean it wasn't harvested by forced labor or shipped via air or dyed with toxic chemicals. Organic cotton is not a license to shop till you drop. When we talk about the ways brands ethical wash their products, I don't know if that's the formal term, that's what I'm calling it. When they ethical wash, they'll use phrases like fair wage, which I don't need to tell you, the word fair is the most unmeasurable adjective one could use to describe someone's pay. I have definitely felt as if I was not being paid fairly at certain jobs. It definitely does not mean the same thing as a living wage, which is what you want to see. Or how about family-owned factory? That also means nothing, because most factories are family-owned businesses. Like, if you work in the industry long enough, you start to see the children of the factory owners opening their own factories. Because, as a reminder, I know I don't really need to remind you, because most of you have been listening to this show for a long time. Think about the hundreds of hours we've spent together. Anyway, just as a reminder, most companies do not own their factories. They are kind of more like small businesses, these factories themselves. So don't let the term family-owned factory make you reach for your wallet. The number one sign of greenwashing, the thing that makes all the alarms go off for me, is words that don't mean very much because they aren't measurable. Okay, another way that retailers and brands greenwash us is by appealing to our love of animals. And you know that I am a cat lady, but I love all animals so much. Can't look at a photo of an animal without being like, oh, and maybe tearing up a little bit, because that's how much I love animals. And so I have fallen for this love of animal washing. We need a better name there. So many times. I don't want leather clothing. I certainly wouldn't go out and buy a new fur coat, but so-called vegan alternatives like faux leather and faux fur are actually environmental nightmares. And when I didn't know that, I would buy these things. That was what I would search for, right? But now I know, and you know too, because as we've mentioned, we've spent a lot of time together, that neither of these options are biodegradable. They are quite literally plastics, just in a different format, if you will, meaning fossil fuels are used to create them, both as an integral ingredient and as part of the energy to fuel the process to create them. Faux fur sheds little microplastics that get into our water, air, and soil with every use. Neither of these materials are sustainable. Yes, I know. Don't at me, bro. Isn't that what people say? I know that there are new biodegradable faux leathers in development, specifically those made of mushrooms, and they are coming. But actually, I learned this week that the mushroom leather company has an exclusive contract with Hermes. So most of us are not getting access to mushroom leather anytime soon. And all of the other ones, as I talked about with Garik, like Pinatex and the cactus leather and apple leather and all of these other things actually contain plastics, and the organic element, whether that's a cactus or an apple, are a very small part of the overall material. So it's effectively greenwashing, even just that it exists. And then, of course, it's greenwashed on top of that. Maybe all of this will change down the road, but even if a miraculous, non-toxic, biodegradable version of faux leather and fur are created, it still doesn't mean we should overconsume them in the first place. Another example of this cute and fluffy greenwashing, maybe I like that, fluffy washing, I'm not really sure. It's Shein's Shein Cares for Animals campaign, which was literally a weird collection of clothing that had some animals on it with a $300,000 pledge to animal-related charities. I don't even know where to start here. First off, $300,000 is not even enough money to be called a drop in the bucket for Shein's finances. But I also just say that if Shein cared about animals at all, it would be working to protect the planet that these animals live on. And instead, Shein is opting to sell us as much stuff as possible, as often as possible, which wastes tons of resources like water and energy. I can't even imagine the environmental impact of manufacturing all those synthetic fabrics and then dyeing them and shipping all this stuff and wrapping it in plastic. Anyway, Shein doesn't care about animals. So be aware that our love of animals is often exploited by retailers as a means of greenwashing. Another way that brands greenwash us into shopping is they brag about certifications and sustainability programs that don't really amount to much when you really start to read about them. I mean, some are just better than others. Various programs may lack transparency, have limited ambitions, use confusing measurements like Garik was talking about. They may have been created by the industry themselves with no outsider actually vetting all of that. Unfortunately, it's up to you to look into all of these programs. And I know it sucks. You shouldn't have to do that. It should be easy. But guess what? Sometimes doing the right thing is hard. Don't be mad at me. Be mad at the brands that have concocted all of these elaborate ways to trick you and me. My advice here is just Google the name of the certification or program and then add greenwashing at the end. And that usually gets me to the truth pretty fast. Another way brands greenwash and confuse you is what Greenpeace calls ad bluster, which I talked about with Garik. This means using ads and PR like gushing blog posts and influencers posting on the gram to exaggerate a green thing that this brand did. The brand may even spend more money bragging about their eco-friendly behavior than they actually spend on whatever this good deed is that they did. I know it feels overwhelming to have to be on the lookout for all of this. It feels unfair. It is unfair. If it makes you angry, that's okay. It's okay to be angry here. I know that I am. I don't want to feel like I've been taken advantage of, that my innate goodness is exploited into a marketing message, but that is what's happening here. You're smart. I'm smart. This is a smart, capable community, and we have the tools to identify and call out greenwashing and educate those around us. So here are some things you can do. Number one, read the label and read all the details. If I encounter a fabric that I don't know, I Google its name along with greenwashing. Seriously, just pair anything with greenwashing and you'll get the answer. Number two, avoid vague words that have no measurable meaning, like natural, green, eco-friendly. If it makes your heart feel warm and fuzzy, take a moment and ask yourself what that word really means. Number three, research certifications and organizations that brands throw out. Just Google the name of the certification followed by the word greenwashing. Number four, background check retailers and brands. Use Good On You or Remake's Transparency Report. I'm extra, so I actually read Glassdoor reviews too because I don't want to give my money to anyone who's terrible to their employees. You can also just make it even easier for yourself by using a shopping platform like Eco-Stylist that already does it for you. Number five, ask questions of retailers and brands. Are you confused about a product? Just ask. I know it feels weird. You think you're being a troll. You're not. They want your money. Make them work for it, right? Well, that's a list. I feel like that's a lot of work right there, but I personally love a list because it helps me narrow my focus and keep me on track. The last thing I'm going to add here before I do the usual please rate and review if you like this podcast spiel is this. I don't know if you caught this in the beginning, but this is freaking episode 95. Yes, I've actually made more than 100 episodes of Clotheshorse when you count all of the mini-sodes and the Patreon exclusive episodes. So as you can imagine, an official episode 100 feels momentous. If you've been listening since the beginning, we have spent so much time together. It's kind of wild, actually. Clotheshorse would not be approaching episode 100 without its community, without all of you. I don't know if I would quite say that Clotheshorse is successful per se, but the success it does have is thanks to all of you. So I would like to hear from all of you for episode 100. Do you have a favorite segment that you think new listeners should hear or that maybe you would like to hear again? A favorite guest you would like to hear an update from? Maybe a story about how Clotheshorse has changed you and the way you look at things? Please reach out via the Clotheshorse hotline or send me a voice memo that you've created using your phone or computer. You can find all of that contact info in the show notes. A 100th episode without all of you is like a sundae without whipped cream. Tragic, right? It's like a cat that just doesn't want to lay on your computer when you're trying to work. I mean, it's just unnatural. So please reach out to me. Tell me what you would like the 100th episode to be. Thanks for listening to this episode of Clotheshorse, researched, written, recorded, and edited by me, Amanda Lee McCarty. If you like what you're hearing, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts. And of course, please tell a friend. And if you would like to support my work here on Clotheshorse, please consider becoming a patron. You can learn more at patreon.com/clothehorsepodcast. You can also make a one-time contribution via Venmo to @crystal_visions. Thanks, as always, to Justin Travis White for our music and audio support. Bye.